Hello and welcome everybody to New Earth Consciousness. Tanya here with Alexia Mellor of mysticdogmama.com. And I'm so excited to have her here because we're going to dive into a topic that has never been discussed before on this channel. And before we dive in, I just want to welcome you, Alexia. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me as your guest. I'm so delighted. I've been looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So, um, let's start with your story because you had an interesting transformational experience. So yeah, let's dive into that.
Sure. I think, to sort of preface things, I have been a spiritual seeker for as long as I can remember. I kind of grew up in a household where my mom was very supportive of those sorts of explorations. She was doing it herself. And so when the kind of moment came for me that sort of catalyzed my most recent transformation, I wasn't totally surprised. And I think I was a little bit, I was, I guess, prepared for it to a degree in terms of being open to what the experience might lead me into. And that was, I had my background prior to what I do right now which is holistic canine nutrition and well-being. And I'm also a Reiki master, and I bring energy work into how we nourish our dogs and ourselves, mind, body, and soul. But prior to that, I was an artist and researcher who was using participatory art and design practices as a way of engaging people with climate change, with these like big complex topics that can feel really abstract and
Mhm.
where you can feel really powerless. How could these methodologies help us to engage with that? And after I completed my PhD in that, I then was doing a postdoctoral fellowship that was just a very toxic environment. And it was just not what I wanted to be doing. And I felt like this isn't the path that I want to be going down. What do I want to do now? And I remember distinctly, I was in Glasgow, Scotland at the time, and I was standing on a street corner and had one of those sort of moments that you imagine of like conversations with the universe of like, what do you want me to do? And the rain was just like pelting and soaking me. And I just felt like this real despair. And I spoke with my mom afterwards, and she said, "Well, why don't you go on your own pilgrimage?" She had previously that year walked the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And I was like, "Oh, I want to do something like that, but my own version of that." She said, "Well, why don't you do that?" And so I went to spend some time with friends and family starting in Mexico, with the idea of just doing an extended Christmas break while I figured things out. And this was, for context, this was like December of 2019.
Mm.
And what ended up happening, as we all know, in the spring of 2020, COVID got me stuck there. And right before we were going into lockdown, I went to see a curandero in the village where I was staying.
Mm.
And he said to me, "What is it that you're actually here for?" And I said, "I just feel like I need my chakras unblocking or something. I need some sort of energy shift." And he said, "You don't need your chakras unblocking. You're a bruja, a witch, an energy worker." And he said, "Your problem is you've been taking on all of this other energy and you've not been grounding it, and you've not been kind of creating boundaries for yourself." And he said, "I want you to pay attention to dogs and cats that cross your path, particularly at this time, because they're healers for you."
Mm.
And 2 days later, we went into hard lockdown. And where I was in Mexico, the government was stopping anyone over 60 from going into the stores. So I shared my contact information with neighbors saying, if you needed anything, I could go in and pick something up. And I sort of was expecting, someone might ask for milk or something like that. And off of the back of me doing that, somebody knocked on the door and said, "Is there any chance you can take this puppy?" And I thought, you can't make this up. So this little 12-week-old puppy shows up at my door who's named Lucky, named by somebody who didn't speak English. And it was like sign after sign after sign. And
Mm.
so I knew it was just this invitation. I had to say yes, even though I felt like this isn't the right time. What am I going to do? How am I going to get him back? I'm not prepared for this, but I knew that this was a threshold moment for me. And quite literally, he had come to my threshold for me to accept that invitation into the next path. And that's what catalyzed everything that I do now.
Wow. Wow. So what changed bringing this puppy in? Like what kind of new awarenesses landed for you?
Well, I think when I heard the curandero tell me that dogs were my healers, and then he shows up as this little puppy. I thought just magic, right? Like rainbows and unicorns and puppies are beautiful, and it was all of that. And he had severe health challenges. And he was a pandemic pup, so he had behavioral challenges. And what I came to understand was that the healing he was inviting me into was so much deeper than I had initially thought that it might be. And it was a lot of shadow work. He triggered an awful lot for me. And if anyone has a reactive dog, you will be able to relate to this too, that they put you into scenarios that are challenging.
Yeah.
But also with his health conditions, I basically I had no support in how to navigate this. A lot of the information that was coming to me was from a UK US context, and I didn't have access to a lot of that stuff. I was sort of deconditioning myself from this belief that I couldn't make his food, that it was too complicated, that I didn't know enough. And there is some truth to that in terms of you need to know what a dog needs when you're going down the path of making their own food. But I basically repurposed my PhD research skills into doing that and then retrained professionally in canine nutrition with the intention of supporting him. It was never about actually turning it into a business. I just wanted to help him. And from that, people saw the complete turnaround that he had just from me changing his diet, that they were like, what did you do? I want to know how to do this. And so I started doing it for other people and starting to teach it. But in terms of like the real awakenings that started, I think one was reclaiming my agency in many, many areas of my life. And I think as well that, particularly with a reactive dog, there's this, I fully believe that Lucky chose me. I believe that our dogs choose us, that they come to us as our partners in on walking this spiritual path from sort of like pagan or witchcraft traditions. It might be referred to as like your familiar, that they're the ones that walk the path and they support you in your own healing magic. And I feel like what Lucky was catalyzing for me in many respects was actually getting back in touch with my inner child that didn't feel like she had boundaries that were respected or didn't feel heard.
Mm.
And in me advocating for him in those kinds of circumstances, I was ultimately advocating for the young version of me that didn't feel like she had a voice. So there was those different layers of healing that just as a result of him with the various challenges that he had and the kind of being that he is, gave me permission to do that deep dive and to do the dive into the triggering that he brought up for me as well.
I'm curious, like, so totally makes sense what you're saying, that when we're triggered by our animal, that it's a reflection of something, it's an opportunity, right? Like, okay, something's coming up for me that I need to heal. Why am I reacting this way to this animal that's just being themselves, right? How is that different from, let's say, a human to human relationship? Because obviously we're triggered by humans as well, other humans. I'm curious, is there a difference?
I think at the core of it, no, there isn't a difference in terms of everything is a mirror for us that's reflecting back something for us, like you said, as an invitation to go deeper into. So a person can do that, a situation can do that, an animal can do that. But I think what's particularly interesting about the way that animals do it is that they're completely innocent. They're totally innocent. And they are eliciting something within us. And I think I mentioned to you last time we talked that dogs have the biggest heart per body mass of any animal. They're very heart led. They are completely heart chakra based. And I think that them in particular, in terms of what they're triggering for us, what they're bringing up, is about that kind of heart chakra healing within us. So I think that's maybe something that's specific to what, in my experience with
Yeah.
dogs, but I think it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I mean, I guess what comes to my mind is certainly, of course, probably the major difference is that you're not dealing with arguments and getting caught up
Right.
in the mind, right? In thoughts and
Yeah.
trying to convince somebody of your position and all of that. It seems to me that with dogs, it's much more energetic and, like you said, heart based. So that makes a lot of sense. It's like we have to. Would you say that just in that process, you were able to connect more deeply with your own heart and your own
Yeah.
compassionate, true self. I mean, I feel that our true nature is one of unconditional love. It's just been, you know, masked or, programmed out of us. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, when you told me about the dog hearts being so big, oh my gosh, I had to tell all my friends about that. I was like, I never knew. That was so like, it puts everything into the right perspective, I think, when it comes to,
Yeah.
being a pet owner.
Yeah, and I think dogs in particular, they're very unique. We had chatted before about how
Mm.
there are so many different cultures that have traditions where they've incorporated dogs into their mythology about how dogs are quite literally walking us to the other side. They might greet us on the other side. So you have that in kind of Egyptian lore. We in our kind of current culture will refer to that as like the Rainbow Bridge. There are other Native American traditions that have seen dogs as walking us through the shadows. So I think that there's this kind of history of them being really intertwined with us. And even from a kind of anthropological perspective, when you're looking at the ways in which we have evolved as humans and dogs have evolved, we have to talk about that process as a co-evolution because we can't understand what it means to be human without looking at dogs because they've been such an important part of how like when we domesticated them from a wolf cousin, used them within our hunting, we sort of bred them to do particular jobs for us, and then as a result of us doing that, we have shaped their evolution as well. So we have a very unique relationship with this species that I think is like no other. I mean, I'm sure even cat people would say like just not dogs. They don't have this. Of course they're affectionate with us, and of course they're close with us, but it's a different kind of relationship that we have with our dogs. And I do feel like the missing part that we don't really talk about when we think about what it means to be a guardian to a dog and what it means to train them, to teach them, to raise them, to nourish them, is that understanding that they are very much walking us home on the spiritual path, and that's, in my opinion, that's what they are here for.
Yeah.
That we chose one another for that experience.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure so many people have stories when they think about dogs that they've had, in particular ones that just really touched them in a particular way. Or, yeah, no, I think of my first childhood dog. I think, yeah, she was super special, and I think without her, my growing up experience would have been very different. She was such an anchor. And
Mhm.
I've come across, I'll never forget, I'll just share this little story. So when I was going through my health crisis in my mid to late 20s, um, it was pretty bad. It was like going through a Kundalini awakening experience. I mean, I was all jumbled up and didn't have the right support, but so my mother had connected me with this psychiatrist, and so I met with this psychiatrist woman, and she had this, oh, I forget what kind of dog it was. It was like one of these short Airedale. So
Mhm.
that's it.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
such
yeah,
a,
I think it
yeah.
was an Airedale. And anyway, so I saw this woman every week, and she was lovely, and she told me, "This too shall pass, Tanya. Don't worry." And anyway, we were coming to the end of our work together, and as a thank you, I don't know, I felt compelled to buy her this. It was this little figurine of an Airedale with angel wings. And so I gave that gift to her, and she literally just burst into tears. It was like, it surprised me, because I was like, oh, for some people, their dog companions oftentimes are like closer than their own spouses, I think sometimes,
Mhm.
or any other human friend. It's like they somehow find a way into our heart that you can't really, I don't think, put into words.
Oh,
Yeah,
I agree. I agree. And I think that they offer us this invitation for experiencing and expressing softer sides of ourselves,
yeah,
and we get to nourish them. And in my community, we do refer to ourselves as guardians. We're not owners of dogs, but we're guardians of them, and taking that role seriously of what does it mean to be a guardian, which is also kind of related to what does it mean to be a steward, which is where I think
Mhm.
the way that we engage with animals is very akin to the way that we engage with the earth
Yeah.
and how we're thinking about stewarding both. And I think when you take that role seriously, it elevates your relationship because you are much more attuned to them. It's not just something that you own. It's not a
Yeah.
possession. It's a being that you really take seriously, the role of giving them their best lives. And that doesn't mean give them all the things. What it means is actually to really understand them as individuals
Yeah.
and to meet them where they are at and meet them in their where their needs are and help them to become the most expressed version of themselves, which is ultimately in terms of that mirroring what we're wanting for ourselves.
Mhm. What's your opinion about people using dogs as for people with special needs, or like, I hear about this, like, oh, it's my comforting companion, like people who maybe are autistic, or that they need that animal companion to settle themselves.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what's your take on that?
I think it's an important relationship. And I think there are many ways to look at it. Like I hear the arguments around what does it mean to actually almost choose that path for an animal where they don't necessarily have any kind of say or agency as to whether or not that's what they want. And I hear that and I agree with many aspects of that too. But from a higher perspective, I do believe that animals find their people in the times and places that they're needed. So I would refer to it almost like a soul contract between the individuals. And I think that they show up to steward
Hmm.
one another.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think particularly from an emotional supports perspective or other kind of therapeutic perspective, dogs can be absolute life changers for people. They can create pathways into experiences that they would never have. They can be facilitators of agency. I think they play a really important role of integrating people into aspects of society that they might not have had access to, and also aspects of themselves that they didn't necessarily have
Hmm.
access to. So I think that
Sure. Yeah.
they're important.
Yeah. I'm curious, what do you think about animal communication? Um, I don't feel like I'm an animal communicator. Sorry for that ding. I have to turn on my focus, my do not disturb. I've been told by my teacher from many years ago. She was an energy healing teacher, psychic, and she told me, she said, "Oh, you work really well with children and animals," which is true. Animals are attracted to me, children are attracted to me, but I've never had, when I hear about with animal communication where people get like literal like messages and whole conversations of what the animal is communicating. I'm curious what you have to say about that and what you know about that. Maybe, yeah,
Yeah.
about
Well, I
that.
practice animal communication. So that is something that I intentionally do, but I actually like to demystify it because I think people often feel that only certain people can do it. And the reality is telepathy is just our natural way of communication.
Mm,
We have been conditioned to become like much more logical and to forget that, right? So the reality is you are communicating with your dogs, even if you're not aware of that.
mm,
Everyone is constantly doing it. There's been loads of research into the ways that dogs connect with us, and they, Rupert Sheldrake was or is a researcher who was looking into the morphic field and looking at how dogs can sense when their owners are coming back home, for example. And at first, it was sort of theorized that they are habituated to sort of like a decrease in our scent over the time of the day, and they recognize when it gets to a particular level that, oh, that's an indicator of like we're coming back, or the light might be a certain way, and those things can play a part. But he was doing research where he would interrupt when the owner was coming back, or he would create the schedule so the owner didn't know when they were actually coming back. And it might be like they were on their drive home,
I
they'd
see.
get a
Yeah.
call and they'd have to go back, right? And
Yeah.
the dogs picked up on this. The dogs had previously been waiting at the door and then left the door when the owner was no longer coming back. And
Mm.
from the perspective of what's going on with animal communication there, everything is connected.
Yeah.
Everything is connected and everything is just energy. So we're all picking up on it. The skill is, how do we focus to pay attention to that? And anyone can do it. I did my in my very first course that I took, it was a workshop that I did on animal communication, and I was convinced I'm going to be terrible at this. I was just really curious, but I was like, I'm going to be terrible at this. And we dove right into it. There was no like real prep. We did a bit of a meditation and we kind of all came together,
Mhm.
but it was like, right, we're starting with this. And we were given some images of animals. We started off with one dog, and we had like 2 minutes and we just had to write down everything we were getting. And I was like, oh God. And I don't do very well like with that kind of pressure. And so I sort of like panicked, like, oh my God, and I'm gonna be the one person who gets nothing. And our instructor was like, write everything down, even if you think it's ridiculous, if it's a smell, if it's a sound, if it's just a flash of something, anything, if you hear something. And the very first thing that came to me was the word spaghetti. And I was like, oh my God, you have to be kidding me. Like, I felt so disappointed in myself. Like, I'm such a failure. And then at the end, we all went around, and the person whose dog it was on the call with us, and she waited until the end. She was taking notes on what everybody said, and then she went back and she talked about what we had each said. So I just was like, "Oh, I got spaghetti." And the feedback she gave me was that she was in the process of moving back to where her parents lived in the same town from like another country. And
Mhm.
she'd been talking to the dog about this, and the dog loved her dad. And one of the reasons the dog loved her dad was because the dad would always make buttered spaghetti as a treat for this dog. And I was like,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
you
Okay.
can't make it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
No
can't make
way.
it up,
No way.
right? So
Spaghetti, so random.
there's no way you can make it up.
Wow.
So random, so random. And it was like that for everybody. Everybody was getting versions of their
Yeah.
spaghetti, like aspects
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
And what that showed me was that what was different about that context versus like you just sitting with your dog, for example, is one, we all had the shared focus and intention of we're doing animal communication. And so that power of that focus and that group support. But I think it's also easier to start with animals that are not your own, because with your own, you're going to be getting things all the time, but you override it because you know your animal. So you're
Right.
sort of doubting it. But if you practice with somebody that you don't know, or I mean, you could even do it like a friend's dog, for example,
Mm.
you start to trust what you're getting more than you trust when you start with your own animal. So,
Yeah.
and I think we all want to start with our own animals.
Yeah.
But if you actually start with somebody else's, that helps build the confidence and the skill. And when you take that into communicating with your own, you're almost setting the expectation that it's going to work.
Right.
That's the difference.
It's interesting. It kind of that's kind of similar with family constellations work because if you are doing a
Mhm.
constellation for somebody and it's like, it's a family system or whatever, and let's say somebody's there that's actually part of that family system, like you wouldn't choose them to be a representative in that system because they know too much,
Yeah.
and so we tend to, like you said, we just end up in our minds with what we already have preconceived. And so when you choose a stranger to step into the system and do the work, it's like this clearer channel for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And it is
There's no
field
baggage.
work. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's no
totally.
assumptions. Yeah, so interesting. And I'm sure I'm curious, like with your dog, the first one that you mentioned, did you feel that you had previous lives with this
With
dog?
Lucky,
Yeah.
I don't know that I've had previous lives with him, but I definitely felt like it was a destined relationship. And it's interesting because I've done a lot of questioning around whether or not, in terms of say manifestation culture, like did I manifest him or did he come into my life because I was made aware of
Mhm.
that possibility or that, that timeline or what have you. Because when I was in Glasgow, when I was up in Scotland, I had started noticing dogs. And I had always told myself, my whole life, I have been very nomadic. I was nomadic as we grew up as kids. I
Mhm.
kind of continued that as an adult. And I always said, I can't have a dog until I'm settled. So there's always this like off-putting for the future. But I started noticing dogs in a different way. I could feel like there was a different intention around my noticing with them. Like I've always liked them, but it was like
Mm.
there was a specificity or a kind of like intentionality around the noticing. And I started noticing breeds that could be potentially portable. And this was well before I had any idea that I would be going to Mexico. I still wasn't thinking about getting a dog. I just noticed that noticing. Then when he came, right before he came into my life, I started noticing there were a lot of people that were rescuing dogs where I was in Mexico, and somebody actually approached me and said, "Would you be willing to foster this little dog?" And I was like, I didn't immediately say no. Even though I wasn't in a position, I was like, well, let me see if that would be a possibility, and then I decided against it. But I feel like what was happening was that I was being prepped for Lucky to come in so that when he did arrive, I'd be open enough to say yes.
Mhm.
So I feel like we have an entanglement that was meant to come together in this particular life experience, but certain things had to happen to open me up to be receptive to allowing him in, is how I've kind of come to it. I don't think like I intentionally manifested a dog. I think my soul knew
Mm.
that this was the experience that I needed and from this particular dog. And so it created these different moments for me to go through that would open my 3D version of myself to say yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, there's so many different thoughts going through my mind. And okay, so there was a question I had and I lost it. Dang it, it was right there on the tip of my tongue. Maybe it'll come back. Oh, here it is. I got it.
Good job. Well done.
What would you say about, and I'm, you may not have an answer to this, but in my life, and I've encountered at times, it's rare, but children who are terrified of dogs or any animal.
Mhm.
Um, do you know what that's coming from? And for me, I'm like, I don't know what it's from, unless maybe it's a past life trauma of interacting with an animal and having been harmed by it. But I had a friend who, unfortunately, I mean, she just even going for a walk, and if somebody was walking their dog on a leash, the child would completely flip out, like terrified. Um, yeah, what do you have to say about that, if anything?
I don't know. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
not a professional in evaluating that, but I would
yeah.
say, I mean, there could definitely be past life stuff. There could also be stuff that the parent is holding on to from their own experiences that they're projecting onto the child or
Hmm.
things that they've said about dogs. So I think it can be quite individual,
Yeah,
but
could be complicated.
yeah, I think it can be complex. I
Yeah,
think it can be complex.
yeah. And the other question I wanted to ask you, so totally separate, sorry, I'm bouncing around here.
It's okay.
Um, when you do energy work on dogs, and I feel what my struggle has been with my own dogs is that, typically in Reiki, you're holding the hands still and you just hold them on the person and with dogs, I find that when I try to do that, they wiggle around. Don't want to sit still. So when you do energy work with animals, is it better? How do you do it? I'm curious. Is it more just remote? Do you do it hands-on? What does it look like?
I do it always. So, like with any energy healing, you don't have to do it hands-on. And even with people, that's always a choice that I offer any of my human clients. Some people prefer hands-on, some people prefer hovering above.
Yeah.
But what I find, particularly with animals that you might not know, that might be sensitive to different types of touch or, have a little bit of stranger danger, that kind of a thing, is creating distance.
Hmm.
And you just hold that field. And offer it to them as an invitation that if they want to come into it, they can come in and engage with it. And if they don't, that's totally fine. And you'll often find, like, if I'm doing even just self Reiki for myself, my dog will come in and kind of like lap that up too. And he's just like sitting near me. And then he goes off when he's had enough.
Yeah.
So I think it's about doing it as an offering, not trying to heal. And I actually think that that's a little bit of
Mm.
something I see that's sort of problematic in the way that we talk about energy healing in the West, where it's like this sending of healing to. And I think that can feel really forceful to
Mm.
some people, and it can feel like there's a power dynamic, like a kind of
Mm.
hierarchy,
Yeah.
when in reality, when you're just offering it, and when we know that the way that Reiki is actually working is like you as the practitioner is coming into alignment and your client is resonating with that alignment. So they're coming into their own alignment so that their body is doing their own healing journey. And I think it's the same with dogs, but I think animals actually offers the opportunity, in my experience, to really almost experience Reiki more because they're so in tune. I mean, they are just love walking around. And because you're not trying to do it to them, if you're just sitting there in the field of it, holding that space as an offering, it's such a beautiful kind of experience for you as a practitioner
Yeah.
as well. So that's how I do it. I mean, there are different ways of doing it, and I think it also depends upon your relationship with the animal. Like my dog will let me put hands on him, but I don't need to.
Yeah.
It's just more that's like part of our, say, little engagement with one another.
I see. Yeah. I've heard,
Yeah. Have you tried with your dogs just sort of holding it?
um, no, I mean, I've done, like the distance Reiki protocol, but never just, holding space. Although, um, I have noticed um, that they do just like being around me. Like there could be other people in the house, and if I'm sitting here doing my work, they want to be like right here next to me. They have
Mhm.
all these different places they could be. They want to be right here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and one thing that I had learned from my teacher that she was talking, and she was an animal communicator. Her gateway animal, I guess, were horses. She was really into horses. Um, but she said one of the things that why animals, I guess, or d domesticated animals, I guess in particular, dogs, for example, that we're talking about, that they love us for our hands, right? Because they don't have hands, and for them just to even touch them and pet them is like they're in heaven. That's why so many of them are just like, how they just. I have one dog who is oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the breed. She's a border collie. She's a
Yeah.
border collie, high energy, super, super smart. But she's just, it's like she can't get enough. She just is like, please just keep petting me, keep petting me, keep petting me. Um, the other larger dog's a little more detached. She's fine either way, but yeah, that's kind of my sense is that we have that's the symbiotic relationship. It's that they are so devoted to us and want to be in service to us and what they receive. I think that as humans, it's hard for us, I think at times, not always, that it's hard to see what we have to offer, right? Because when we think of us as humans, it's like we've caused so much destruction on the planet, you know? And I know, obviously animals are innocent, they're just innocent. And so, um, just in this moment, as I'm thinking about this, it's like what dogs have to offer is for us to make contact. Again, going back to where we started, to make contact with that aspect of ourselves that actually is very much connected to the divine and very much connected to, the light. And in spite of all the different ways that us humans can express, I think dogs are calling us to, yeah, that heart-centered state. Yeah.
They absolutely are. They absolutely are. And I was sort of chuckling when you were mentioning about the gift of our hands for them.
Mhm.
Because I joke around with my friend who's also a canine nutrition consultant that they love our opposable thumbs because we can access like all the treats and
Oh
stuff for them.
yeah.
I think they've become very aware. Like,
Like, ooh, they got the thumbs.
yeah, exactly. No, but I think all of that is true. And I think as well that there are many studies about the ways in which we engage with animals, the way we treat animals is reflected in how we treat one another and vice versa. So I think that they're inviting us back to our divinity for sure. And I think they're also inviting us back to our true nature of how we engage with one another.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And for these last few, we got about 10 minutes or so. I'd love for you to dive maybe a little bit into the nutritional aspect of dogs. And I know that um, the dog food that's out there that's sold to to us for our animals is awful, right? I don't even know what's in it. Like it's pretty bad.
Mhm.
Um, let's just dive into that. And I know it maybe for some people it might feel overwhelming to really look at that and to come to terms with that. So I'll just open the floor for you to speak to that.
Yeah. And I to address that last point too, I think there's no guilting or shaming.
Hmm.
It's one of those things where when you learn more, you do better. And you start with where you're at. You don't have to make huge, massive changes overnight to support your dog's health, but it's doing what you can and with what you have access to and means to. But I think the nutrition component is so important and so close to my heart because it steps into asking us what does nourishment actually look like for our dogs and conversely what that looks like for ourselves. So while I talk about food, it's food within the component of what is going to nourish us, right? It's beyond the bowl. But I think it's always to start with what is a dog biologically? They're basically a modified wolf. They're not wolves, but they're a modified wolf. So their whole system, when you look at everything from the way that their jaws are set up, the kind of teeth that they have, their levels of salivary amylase, which is very low, that's the enzyme that helps to digest carbohydrates. They have a short digestive tract. They have really high stomach acid. They are built, when you look at the kind of wider web, as what we call facultative carnivores, which means that they're a carnivore. They derive the majority of their nutrients from animal-based products, but they've developed the ability to be able to handle some levels of starches, not high levels of starches. And unfortunately, the kibbles of the world are 60% upwards starches. So that's where we've started to see a lot of health challenges. We know that eating high levels of carbs, particularly ultra processed refined carbs for us, is linked to diabetes, all kinds of inflammation, cancer, heart disease, etc. We're built to really handle carbohydrates much better than they are. So we're seeing those impacts at an exponential rate in our dog populations because we're feeding them what I refer to those as species inappropriate diets. So I focus on fresh food, species appropriate diets, which is feeding them what they're designed to thrive on. So dogs can survive on the stuff that we're feeding them, but when we start to ask the question of what does it look like to thrive, that's where we start to look at foods that are more akin to what they would have found in nature. They are domesticated. They are not wild. But in terms of the way that their biology is set up, they are designed to eat the carcasses. That's the role that they play in the kind of web, right? And to break all of that down so that all those nutrients go back into the soil so the plants can uptake them. So I think in terms of what it means to nourish a dog, It's looking at providing those species appropriate foods, but also in a form that is enriching to them. So that's where things like raw meaty bones are so great for dogs, and having that as the kind of core of what a carnivore should be eating,
Mm,
and how that helps them to build the muscles in the kind of the in terms of their jaws and their necks and all of that, but it's also deeply enriching to them. So for me, that's almost, it's a spiritual act,
mm.
allowing them to have access to the food that they were designed, that they evolved
Yeah,
to eat.
yeah, yeah. And so I know that, so so you said they can handle some amount of starches. Because I would imagine it gets very expensive if it's like, okay, I got to feed my dog nothing but meat. It's like, wow, his food bill's going to cost more than mine or whatever.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and like you said, each dog is unique, but maybe in general, like what would you mix? So it would be raw meat mixed with what potentially?
Well, so I'm an advocate of fresh food, which means either raw or gently cooked, and that will be determined by the individual dog. Some dogs don't do as well with raw meat. Some like do better with them actually digesting a gently cooked diet.
Mhm.
So that's where I use the term fresh to kind of distinguish that. But it's the way that I feed, and I should say that there is no one right way to feed a dog. You will hear and see all kinds of arguments online about this is the way to do it and balance and complete and all these different guidelines and all that, but they're just guidelines. The reality is we don't know what a human should absolutely eat because it's all individual. We don't know what a dog should eat, but we use like these guidelines. So I always say start with the guidelines and then look at what is right for your individual dog and make adjustments to that. But it's basically from a kind of ratio perspective, roughly 80% muscle meat, which is like the meat that you would find at a store or a butcher.
Mhm.
Then you add in 10% raw meaty bones. So that would be any kind of softer bones. We tend not to recommend weight-bearing bones from larger animals because that's where you can get the risk of fractures, teeth fractures that people are often concerned with, or impaction. But
Mhm.
if you're looking at things at like, say, chicken carcasses, duck carcasses, depending on the size of your dog as well. So you always feed it according to the size of the dog. But those kinds of options. And then organ meat. And we always want to prioritize about 5% liver. Liver is like your dog's multivitamin, and 5% of another secreting organ, something like, say, kidney, spleen, that kind of thing. That's your rough base for your dog's diet. But that's not complete in and of itself. It doesn't have everything that a dog needs. So I tend to recommend adding in small oily fish. So things like sardines or anchovies or mackerel, that kind of a thing, sprats that we have over here in the UK.
Mhm.
You also want to add in eggs, a rotation of eggs, and then some supplemental things like algae oil for your EPA, DHA is a really great option. We add in kelp for some iodine, things like wheat germ oil to provide vitamin E, like where you're kind of building out some of the diet. Also, a rotation of seeds, etc., that will provide micronutrients like manganese and extra zinc, that kind of a thing. And then some people add in shellfish like blue mussels and oysters to kind of ramp up some of the micronutrient profiles.
Yeah.
I also recommend adding in a small percentage of non-starchy vegetables as a fiber source. In terms of actual starches, you'll see in a lot of pet foods, they'll use things like butternut squash or sweet potato or potato. Those are sugary.
Mm.
And like I said, dogs don't have a biological need for carbohydrates, and excess sugar for them can actually fuel a yeast overgrowth. Their liver turns that extra sugar into a fat that feeds the yeast. So I'm always wary of those starchy veg, particularly if you've got an itchy dog, if you've got a dog with some gut issues. That's usually the first thing I'll recommend looking at in your if you're feeding a commercial food is does it have those ingredients, and switch to something that doesn't have that.
Yeah.
I totally get that when you've got a bigger dog, this way of feeding can absolutely be expensive. However, that being said, you don't have to go all in. You don't have to do 100%. You can do small amounts. Research has shown that even switching out 20 to 25% of your kibble
Mhm.
and putting in fresh food in the place of that
Mhm.
can offer immense health benefits.
Mm.
So you can start small.
Yeah.
and you can work your way up as well.
Yeah.
It's also about looking at investment. We're going to pay the money on one end of the
True.
scale.
You're gonna
Either,
have a big vet bill down down the road for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So for me, I look at it as an investment. Now, I've that's my little dog Lucky. I mean, he's a small Chihuahua, so it's very easy for me to feed him this way, and he's going to destroy all the covers. He's making his little nest.
Yeah.
But But you can start with adding in like a tin of sardines,
Mhm.
or you can add in some eggs over the course of the week, or add in some of your leftover like green veggies, kind of that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
That's a really wonderful way to start, in terms of both making it an easy transition for you and just starting to add some more nutrients as a way of like bolstering their health,
Yeah.
as well as even something like bone broth. Bone
Mm.
broth is something that I recommend for every single dog. I don't recommend a human commercial one because most human bone broths are made using like onions and bay leaves and things that are toxic to dogs. So, and they add in a lot of salt. So I kind of avoid that. If you're buying a commercial one, do a dog or pet specific because cats can have it. Or make your own by getting bones, put them
Yeah.
in the slow cooker, fill it up with water,
Yeah.
put
Just
it on high overnight.
yeah. Yeah. Simple. Amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Alexia, so upon closing, and thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful, nourishing conversation.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
what do you offer for people that are curious more to learn more about you and your work?
Absolutely. If you come over to my website, I have a free downloadable starter pack. I can give you the direct link to the website.
Mhm.
That's a really great way. It's free to start to understand my approach to nourishment, which I use my acronym FETCH to kind of help people walk through the steps. It's what I see as the 5 pillars of optimal health for our dog. So it starts with fresh food for the F. Energetics is the E, and that I'm informed by a Chinese medicine lens. So if you have started to add some fresh things into your diet, your dog's diet, but you're still seeing like they might still have a few issues going on, we look at the individuality of that dog. Maybe it's a warm dog that needs some more cooling proteins, or maybe it's a cool dog that needs some more warming proteins. So you can start tweaking that way.
Mhm.
The T is for targeted approaches. I think most people who have animals and are into the kind of holistic way of supporting them have an absolute supplement graveyard where you've bought all the products to try all of the things. It's expensive, it's overwhelming, and you don't know what's actually helping. So I help you to take a targeted approach so you can actually test what's working and find the things that are right for your individual dog. The C in fetch is for curiosity. Sometimes asking some different questions helps us to understand what's going on with our dog and how we can best support them, both from a nutrition perspective, but also just from a general well-being perspective. And then the H is for holistic health, and that looks at the whole picture and the whole dog and your relationship with them as well. So it encompasses everything from how do you take a more natural approach to mitigating fleas and ticks to also energy healing and how you and your dog can connect through energy because that's another part of health that we often overlook, but creating that kind of synergy between you two. So I have a free starter pack that gives you some points to start with each one of those so you can get to better know your dog as an individual.
Amazing. Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alexia. And to the viewers, please like, share, and subscribe. Check out Alexia's website, mysticdogmama.com. Links are in the description of the video. Yeah, thank you so much, Alexia. This has been lovely.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I have my own podcast, Mystic Dog Mom, so it's nice to be on the other side of it and have some
Oh yeah, so
conversations
yeah,
outside of that. So thank you so much.
I forgot to say that. So your podcast, just so people know that Alexia dives, you go to her podcast, she dives deeper into all of those topics that she just mentioned. She's a wealth of information. Don't pass it up. It's a good source.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Much love,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you so much.